The wind howled like a wounded animal across the Montana plains, and Rebecca Vance knew, with a certainty that chilled her more than the December cold, that she had made a terrible mistake leaving town that morning. The sky had been clear when she set out from Llano in her wagon, determined to reach her sister's homestead 30 miles north before Christmas. But the weather in Montana Territory had a way of turning vicious without warning, and now fat snowflakes swirled so thick she could barely see her horse's ears. Her back had been aching since dawn, a persistent throb she had attributed to the rough wagon seat, but as another sharp pain lanced through her swollen belly, Rebecca realized with growing terror that her baby was coming, and coming now, 3 weeks earlier than the doctor had predicted. She was only 22 years old, alone, and her husband had been dead for 5 months, shot during a dispute over mining claims that should never have escalated the way it did. Thomas had been a good man, if somewhat reckless, and she had loved him in the way young brides love their first husbands. But he was gone, and she was facing the prospect of bringing their child into the world in the middle of a blizzard that was rapidly becoming a whiteout. The horse whinnied nervously, tossing its head as the wind picked up even more, and Rebecca knew she needed to find shelter immediately, or they would all perish out here in this frozen wasteland. Through the driving snow, she spotted what looked like a dark shape ahead, a structure of some kind, and she urged the horse forward with trembling hands. The pain was coming more frequently now, waves of agony that made her gasp and grip the reins until her knuckles turned white. The shape resolved itself into a small line cabin, the kind that ranchers built throughout their properties for cowboys to use during cattle drives or winter range riding. It looked sturdy enough, with a solid roof and walls, and Rebecca sent up a prayer of thanks as she managed to guide the wagon close to the door. Getting down from the wagon seat was an ordeal that left her panting and dizzy. The wind tore at her heavy wool cloak, trying to rip it from her shoulders, and snow stung her face like needles. She stumbled to the cabin door and pushed it open, relieved to find it unlocked, and practically fell inside. The interior was dark and cold, but at least it was shelter from the wind. Rebecca knew she needed to get her horse unhitched and into some kind of protection. But another contraction hit her so hard that she doubled over, crying out into the empty cabin. She had no idea how long she knelt there on the rough wooden floor, trying to breathe through the pain. But when she finally looked up, a figure was standing in the doorway, covered in snow like some ghost from a winter tale. Rebecca's heart seized with fear until the figure moved into the cabin, stomping snow from his boots, and she saw it was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, with a face weathered by sun and wind. "Madam." His voice was deep and concerned, and he quickly closed the door against the storm. "Are you hurt? I saw your wagon from the ridge and thought somebody might be in trouble." Rebecca tried to speak, but another contraction gripped her, and all she could do was gasp and clutch her belly. The man crossed the space between them in 2 long strides and knelt beside her, his dark eyes taking in her condition with quick understanding. "You're having the baby," he said, and it was not a question. "Right now?" "Yes," Rebecca managed to get out between pants. "I did not think it would come so soon. I was trying to reach my sister's place." "That is not happening today," the man said grimly, glancing at the door where the wind was already piling snow against the frame. "This storm is going to get worse before it gets better." "I am Nathan Quinn, and I work for the Double R Ranch. This is one of their line cabins. We need to get you comfortable and prepare for this baby to arrive." Rebecca wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, preparing for childbirth in a tiny cabin in the middle of a blizzard with a complete stranger. But another wave of pain drove all humor from her mind. Nathan moved with quick efficiency, helping her to the narrow bunk that was built against one wall. There was a small stove in the corner, and he had it lit within minutes, feeding it with wood from a supply box. The cabin began to warm slowly, though Rebecca was shaking so hard she thought she might fly apart. "I am Rebecca Vance," she said when she could speak again. "From Lano. My husband is dead. I am alone." "You are not alone right now," Nathan said firmly, and something in his voice steadied her. He looked to be in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a strong jaw shadowed with stubble. His hands were large and capable as he helped her remove her wet cloak and boots. "Have you got anything in that wagon we need? Blankets, supplies?" "There is a trunk," Rebecca said, "with baby things, and my bag." Nathan nodded and went back out into the storm. Rebecca could hear him moving around outside, and then he returned with her trunk and carpet bag, along with an armload of supplies from the wagon. He was covered in snow again, but he did not seem to notice the cold. He also brought in her horse, leading the poor frightened animal into the cabin itself, which was barely large enough for all of them, but at least meant the horse would not freeze to death outside. "I have helped with foaling," Nathan said as he opened Rebecca's trunk and found the clean linens she had packed for the birth. "And I was there when my sister had her first baby, so I have some idea what needs to happen. But you need to tell me what you need, and we will get through this together." Rebecca nodded, too overwhelmed to do anything else. The contractions were coming faster now, barely giving her time to catch her breath between them. Nathan heated water on the stove and washed his hands thoroughly, then helped Rebecca into a more comfortable position. He was surprisingly gentle for such a large man, and his presence, calm and solid, kept her from giving in to the panic that threatened to swallow her whole. The hours that followed were a blur of pain and effort. The blizzard raged outside, piling snow against the walls until the cabin felt like a small island adrift in a frozen sea. Nathan talked to her through the worst contractions, his voice steady and low, telling her stories about growing up in Kansas, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about his mother who had raised 5 children mostly on her own, while his father was away driving cattle. He kept the fire going and the water hot, and when Rebecca thought she could not bear another moment, he was there, supporting her, encouraging her, refusing to let her give up. "You are doing fine," he kept saying. "You are strong. This baby is almost here." And then, as the wind reached a howling crescendo outside and the cabin shook with the force of it, Rebecca's son was born. Nathan caught him in clean linen, and for a moment there was terrible silence and Rebecca's heart stopped. But then the baby let out a wail, thin and indignant, and Nathan laughed, actually laughed with relief and wonder. "You have a son," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "A fine, healthy son." He cleaned the baby with warm water and wrapped him in the soft blankets Rebecca had packed, then placed him in her arms. Rebecca looked down at her son's tiny red face and felt her heart crack open with a love so fierce it took her breath away. The baby had a fuzz of dark hair, and his eyes, when they flickered open, were a cloudy blue. He was perfect. He was here. He was alive. Nathan tended to Rebecca with the same calm efficiency he had shown throughout the birth, making sure she was clean and comfortable, that the bleeding was not too heavy, that she had water to drink. The cabin had grown quite warm from the stove, and the horse had settled in one corner, seemingly content with the arrangement. The storm still raged outside, but inside the small cabin, there was warmth and life and something that felt almost like peace. "Thank you," Rebecca said when Nathan finally sat down on the floor near the bunk, exhausted. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not found me. We would have died." "But you did not," Nathan said simply. He was looking at the baby with an expression Rebecca could not quite read. "What will you name him?" "I was thinking Thomas, after his father," Rebecca said. "But that does not feel right somehow. It feels like this is someone new, someone who fought to be born in the middle of a blizzard and won." "James," Nathan suggested quietly. "It means supplanter. Someone who overcomes." "James," Rebecca repeated, testing the name. "James Thomas Vance. Yes, that fits him." They sat in companionable silence for a while, listening to the wind howl. The baby nursed at Rebecca's breast, his tiny mouth working eagerly, and she marveled at the strength of him, at his determination to live. Nathan had moved to sit with his back against the wall, his long legs stretched out in front of him, and despite his obvious exhaustion, he kept watch, tending the fire, checking on the horse, making sure Rebecca had everything she needed. "You should sleep," Rebecca said. "You must be exhausted." "So must you," Nathan replied. "But one of us should stay awake to keep the fire going. The temperature is still dropping." "We can take turns," Rebecca suggested. "I will rest now with James and you wake me in a few hours." Nathan nodded agreement, and Rebecca let herself drift off, the baby warm against her chest, secure in the knowledge that someone was watching over them. When she woke, the cabin was dim with the gray light of late afternoon, though it was hard to tell with the snow still falling steadily outside. Nathan had made coffee on the stove, and the smell of it was wonderful. He had also opened some of the supplies from the wagon and found the bread and cheese Rebecca had packed for her journey. "The storm is not letting up," he said, handing her a cup of coffee once she had settled the baby in the nest of blankets beside her. "We will be here at least through tomorrow, maybe longer." "I am sorry to keep you from your work," Rebecca said. "The ranch will wonder where you are." "The ranch knows I am out checking the line cabins," Nathan said. "They will not expect me back until the storm clears, and even if they did, I would not leave you alone out here, not with a newborn baby." Rebecca felt a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the coffee. "You have been very kind, more than kind. I do not know how I can ever repay you." "There is nothing to repay," Nathan said, but he looked uncomfortable, as if kindness was not something he expected to be thanked for. Any decent person would have done the same. "I do not think that is true," Rebecca said quietly, "but I am grateful nonetheless." They passed the rest of that day in the strange intimacy of forced proximity. The cabin was small enough that there was no privacy, but Nathan was respectful, turning away when Rebecca needed to tend to herself or nurse the baby. He talked about the ranch where he worked, about the cattle and the land, about the hard winters and the brief, beautiful summers. Rebecca found herself telling him about her life in Llano, about the general store her father had run until his death 2 years ago, about marrying Thomas and their plans to start a ranch of their own with the money he expected to make from his mining claim. "He was not a miner by nature," Rebecca said. "He was a rancher at heart, but he thought the mine would give us a faster start. Instead, it got him killed." "I am sorry," Nathan said, and the words were simple but sincere. "That must have been hard, losing him and facing this alone." "I have my sister," Rebecca said. "Anna. She is married to a homesteader up north of here. She has been writing to me all through the pregnancy, begging me to come live with them. I finally decided she was right, that I could not manage alone in town with a baby. But now I am beginning to think I should have waited until spring." "Spring would have been wiser," Nathan agreed with a slight smile. "But then, babies come when they come. They do not wait for convenient weather." That night, as the storm continued to rage, Rebecca lay awake listening to the wind and the small snuffling sounds James made in his sleep. Nathan was asleep on the floor near the stove, wrapped in his bedroll, one arm pillowed under his head. In the dim light from the fire, she could see the lines of his face, strong and weathered, handsome in a rough way that was entirely different from Thomas's boyish good looks. There was something solid about Nathan Quinn, something dependable, and Rebecca found herself thinking about what it must be like to be the kind of woman who had a man like that to depend on, not just in a crisis, but always. The thought made her feel disloyal to Thomas's memory, and she pushed it away. Her husband had been dead less than 6 months. It was far too soon to be thinking about other men, even in the abstract. And yet, watching Nathan sleep, seeing the way he had cared for her and her baby without hesitation, without expecting anything in return, Rebecca could not help but feel drawn to him in a way that was more than just gratitude. The next day dawned clear and brutally cold. The storm had blown itself out sometime before sunrise, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Drifts were piled higher than a man's head against the cabin, and the landscape was a blinding expanse of white under a pale blue sky. Nathan dug them out in the morning, clearing a path to the door and checking on the horse, which had weathered the storm well enough. "The trail will be impassable for days," he said when he came back inside, stamping snow from his boots. "The drifts are too deep for a wagon. But once the main roads are cleared, I can ride to your sister's place and let her know you are safe, bring back help to get you there." "That is very kind," Rebecca said. She was feeling stronger today, though still tired and sore. James was nursing well and seemed healthy, his color good, his cries lusty when he was hungry. "But I do not want to impose on you any longer than necessary." "It is no imposition," Nathan said, and again there was that tone in his voice that suggested he meant it. "I have nowhere else I need to be right now. The cattle have been moved to winter pasture, and the other hands can manage without me for a few days." So they settled into a strange kind of domestic routine in the tiny cabin. Nathan hunted, bringing back rabbits that he skinned and cooked over the fire. Rebecca, as her strength returned, helped prepare meals and kept the cabin tidy. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their lives, their hopes, their losses. Rebecca learned that Nathan had been working as a cowboy since he was 15, that he had never married, because he had never found a woman willing to put up with the hard life of a ranch hand, that he sent most of his wages home to his mother in Kansas, who was getting too old to work the small farm she insisted on keeping. "I always thought I would have my own place someday," Nathan admitted one evening as they sat by the fire, James sleeping peacefully in Rebecca's arms. "A few hundred acres, enough cattle to make a decent living, maybe a family. But the years go by and it never seems like the right time, and now I am 28 years old and no closer to that dream than I was at 18. "You could still do it," Rebecca said. 28 is not so old. You have time." "Maybe," Nathan said, but he sounded doubtful. He was watching the baby with an expression that made Rebecca's heart ache. "He is a beautiful child. You are very blessed." "I am," Rebecca agreed. "Though I am terrified of raising him alone. I do not know the first thing about being a mother, really. And without a father to guide him, to teach him how to be a man." The words hung in the air between them, and Rebecca felt her cheeks flush. She had not meant to be so forward to hint at anything. But Nathan looked at her with those dark, serious eyes, and she saw something in them that made her breath catch. "A child needs a father," Nathan said quietly. "And a woman like you should not have to face the world alone. You are strong, Rebecca. I have seen that. But strength does not mean you have to carry every burden by yourself." "What are you saying?" Rebecca asked, her heart pounding. Nathan took a breath, and she could see that he was nervous, this confident man who had delivered her baby in a blizzard without flinching. "I am saying that I would be honored if you would let me be a father to James, and a husband to you if you would have me." Rebecca stared at him, stunned. "We barely know each other. We met 3 days ago." "I know," Nathan said. "And I know it is too soon, that you are still grieving your husband, that this is not how these things are supposed to happen. But I also know that I have never met anyone like you, Rebecca. In 3 days, you have shown me more courage and strength than I have seen in most people in a lifetime. And that boy in your arms, he deserves a chance at a real family, at a father who will love him and raise him right. I can be that father. I want to be." "Why?" Rebecca whispered. "Why would you take on another man's child, a widow you just met?" Nathan leaned forward, and the firelight cast shadows across his face. "Because when I caught that baby and heard him cry, when I put him in your arms and saw the way you looked at him, something in me changed. I felt like I was part of something important, something right. And I realized that all those years I spent waiting for the right time, the right woman, the right circumstances, I was just making excuses. Sometimes life puts something in front of you and you just know. I know, Rebecca. I know this is right." Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. She looked down at James, at his perfect tiny face, and then back at Nathan. "I do not love you," she said honestly. "Not yet. I barely know you, and I still have grief in my heart for Thomas." "I know that too," Nathan said. "I am not asking you to love me right now. I am asking you to give us a chance, to let me prove to you that I can be the kind of man you and James need. If you decide after a while that it will not work, that you do not want me, then we will part ways and I will still help you however I can. But give me the chance to try. Please." Rebecca felt as if she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to jump into unknown waters. Everything about this was too fast, too strange, too much like something from one of the dime novels she used to sneak and read as a girl. But she looked at Nathan's face, at the sincerity there, at the hope, and she thought about the alternative, going to her sister's homestead and being dependent on Anna and her husband, raising James alone, struggling to provide for him, always wondering if she was enough. And she thought about how safe she had felt with Nathan during the storm, how he had cared for her without hesitation, how he looked at her son with such tenderness. "Yes," she heard herself say. "Yes, I will give you that chance. I will marry you, Nathan Quinn." The smile that broke across Nathan's face was like sunrise, warm and bright and full of promise. He reached out and took her hand, the one that was not supporting the baby, and squeezed it gently. "You will not regret this," he said. "I swear to you, Rebecca, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you and James are happy and safe." "I will hold you to that," Rebecca said. And despite everything, despite the strangeness and the speed and the uncertainty, she found herself smiling back. 2 days later, when the roads were finally passable, and a rescue party from the Double R Ranch arrived looking for Nathan, they found all 3 of them alive and well in the line cabin. Nathan explained the situation to his boss, a gruff older man named Samuel Rodriguez, who ran the ranch with an iron hand but had a soft spot for his best hands. Samuel took one look at Rebecca and the baby, at the way Nathan hovered protectively near them, and shook his head with a knowing smile. "I suppose you will be wanting some time off then," Samuel said, "to get yourself properly married and settled." "If you can spare me," Nathan said. "I know we are short-handed with winter coming on." "We will manage," Samuel said gruffly. "You have been a good hand, Nathan. You deserve a chance at happiness. Bring your bride to the ranch house when you are ready. My wife will want to meet her and help with whatever you need." So it was arranged. Nathan and Rebecca were married a week later in Leno, in a simple ceremony at the small church with only a handful of witnesses present. Anna had made the trip down from her homestead, and she had cried through the entire service, happy tears that her sister would not be alone after all. Rebecca wore a simple dress of blue wool, and Nathan wore his best shirt and trousers, his hair neatly combed, his boots polished to a shine. James, barely 2 weeks old, slept through the ceremony in Anna's arms. Afterward, they returned to the ranch, where the Rodriguezes had made room for them in one of the small cabins used by married ranch hands. It was bigger than the line cabin where James had been born, with 2 rooms and a proper kitchen, but it was still humble. Nathan worried that it was not enough, that Rebecca deserved better, but she assured him that it was more than adequate. She had grown up over a store, after all, and she knew how to make a home out of simple surroundings. The first weeks of marriage were awkward, as Rebecca supposed all marriages were, but perhaps more so given the circumstances of theirs. Nathan was unfailingly kind and patient, giving her space to grieve and adjust, never demanding more than she was ready to give. They slept in the same bed because there was only one, but Nathan kept a respectful distance, never touching her beyond what was necessary and proper. He was devoted to James, coming home from long days working cattle to hold the baby and talk to him in a soft voice, telling him stories and making silly faces that made Rebecca laugh despite herself. Slowly, carefully, they built something together. Rebecca learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and the hard work, the community of people who lived and worked together. The ranch wives welcomed her warmly, bringing by food and baby clothes and advice on everything from teething to washing diapers. Nathan's boss's wife, Mariela Rodriguez, took a particular interest in Rebecca, teaching her how to preserve food for the winter, how to make the most of limited resources, how to find joy in the small moments of frontier life. As winter deepened and the snow piled high around their little cabin, Rebecca found herself falling into a comfortable routine with Nathan. They would have breakfast together before he left for work, and she would spend the day caring for James and keeping their home. In the evenings, they would have dinner together, and Nathan would hold the baby while Rebecca cleaned up, and then they would sit by the fire and talk. Sometimes Nathan would read aloud from the newspaper or a book, and Rebecca would mend clothes or knit. It was peaceful and domestic, and Rebecca was surprised to find that she was happy. She was also surprised to find that her feelings for Nathan were changing. She caught herself watching him when he did not know she was looking, admiring the way he moved, the strength in his hands, the laugh lines around his eyes. She liked the way he smelled, like leather and pine and hard work. She liked the sound of his voice, deep and steady. She liked the way he was with James, so gentle and patient, already every inch a father despite having no obligation to be one. One evening in late January, as they sat by the fire after James had been put to bed in his cradle, Nathan reached over and took Rebecca's hand. It was not the first time he had done so, but this time it felt different, charged with a new energy. Rebecca looked at him and saw that his dark eyes were searching her face, as if looking for something. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "I do not want to rush you, but I need you to know that my feelings for you have become very deep. You are not just a responsibility to me, or a good deed. You have become the most important person in my life, you and James both, and I want this to be a real marriage in every way if you are willing." Rebecca's heart was racing. She knew what he was asking, what he was offering, and she realized that she wanted it too, that somewhere in the long winter nights and the quiet domestic moments, she had fallen in love with Nathan Quinn. Not the wild, passionate love she had felt for Thomas when she was young and everything was new, but something deeper and steadier, something that felt like coming home. "I am willing," she said softly. "I want that too, Nathan. I want us to be a real family." The kiss Nathan gave her was gentle and tentative at first, as if he was afraid she might change her mind. But Rebecca leaned into him, and the kiss deepened, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Nathan stood and held out his hand, and Rebecca took it, and he led her to their bed. What happened there was tender and careful, both of them learning each other, finding their way together. It was nothing like Rebecca's experiences with Thomas, which had been quick and fumbling and often awkward. Nathan took his time, making sure she was comfortable, that she wanted each new touch, each new intimacy. And when it was over and they lay tangled together in the dark, Rebecca felt a sense of completeness she had never known before. "I love you," she whispered against his chest, feeling the words were true as she said them. "I did not think I would ever say that again to anyone, but I do. I love you, Nathan." She felt him tense with emotion, and then he was holding her tight, his face buried in her hair. "I love you too," he said, his voice rough. "I have loved you since the moment I saw you in that line cabin, so brave and so strong, and I will love you until the day I die." From that night forward, their marriage was truly real in every sense. The winter passed in a blur of work and domesticity and growing love. James thrived, growing chubby and healthy, learning to smile and then to laugh. Nathan was a natural father, patient and playful, and Rebecca would often find the two of them together, Nathan teaching James silly songs or showing him how to clap his tiny hands together. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and turning the Montana prairie into a sea of wildflowers. Nathan took Rebecca and James out riding when the weather was fine, showing them the boundaries of the ranch, the places he loved. They would have picnics by streams swollen with snowmelt, and Nathan would hold James while Rebecca waded in the cold water, laughing like a girl again. Those days were some of the happiest Rebecca had ever known. In May, Nathan came home one evening with news that made him nervous and excited in equal measure. Samuel Rodriguez was selling off parcels of ranch land to his best hands, offering them at a price that was more than fair. Nathan had saved most of his wages for years, and with the money Rebecca had from selling Thomas's mining claim and their modest savings, they had just enough to buy a section of land on the eastern edge of the ranch property. It would be theirs to build on, to run cattle on, to pass down to James and any other children they might have. "It is what I have always wanted," Nathan said, pacing their small cabin in his excitement. "Our own place. But it will be hard, Rebecca. Harder than anything we have done so far. We will have to build everything from nothing, and it will be years before we turn any kind of real profit." "Then we will do it together," Rebecca said firmly. "You gave me and James a future when we had none. Let me help you build yours." So they bought the land and spent that summer building their future. Nathan worked on the ranch during the day and on their own land in the evenings and on Sundays. Rebecca helped as much as she could with James strapped to her back, clearing brush, hauling water, gathering stones for a foundation. Other ranch hands helped when they could, and slowly a house began to take shape. It was not large or fancy, just 4 rooms and a loft, but it was solid and well built, and it was theirs. They moved in at the end of August, and Rebecca cried the first night they spent there, overwhelmed by emotion. Nathan held her and told her that this was just the beginning, that they would fill this house with love and children and memories, and it would be everything they had dreamed of. That fall, Rebecca realized she was pregnant again. She told Nathan one evening as they sat on the porch of their new house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. He was so happy that he picked her up and spun her around, laughing like a boy, and then he got down on his knees and pressed his face to her still flat belly and whispered to the baby growing inside that he could not wait to meet them. James was walking now, toddling around on unsteady legs, getting into everything. He called Nathan Papa and Rebecca Mama, and there was never any question that Nathan was his father in every way that mattered. When people in town asked, they simply said that James was theirs, and if anyone noticed that the timing did not quite add up, they were polite enough not to mention it. The winter was hard, as Montana winters always were, but they had plenty of supplies laid in and a warm house and each other. Rebecca's pregnancy progressed without complication, and she was healthier this time, not worn down by grief and loneliness as she had been carrying James. Nathan was attentive and protective, barely letting her lift anything heavy, constantly worried that she was doing too much. Their second son was born in March, during a late-season snowstorm that was nowhere near as bad as the blizzard that had brought James into the world. Nathan delivered this baby too, his hands steady and sure, and when he placed the squalling infant in Rebecca's arms, the look on his face was one of pure joy. They named him Daniel Nathan Quinn, and James, not quite 15 months old, was fascinated by his tiny brother, always wanting to touch him and help with him. The years that followed were full of hard work and simple joys. The ranch prospered slowly but steadily. Nathan was good with cattle and even better with horses, and he built a reputation for breeding quality stock. Rebecca kept the house and the garden and raised the boys, and when they needed extra money, she took in sewing and sold eggs and butter in town. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning. Nathan made sure he went to school in town whenever the weather allowed, and Rebecca taught him his letters at home during the winter. Daniel was more rambunctious, always running and climbing and getting into mischief, but he had a sweet nature that made it impossible to stay angry with him for long. When James was 5 years old, he asked Nathan one day where his other father was, the one whose last name he shared. Nathan looked at Rebecca and she nodded, and together they told James the truth. They told him about Thomas Vance, about how he had died before James was born, about the blizzard and the line cabin, and how Nathan had helped bring James into the world. They told him that Nathan had chosen to be his father, that it was not an accident or an obligation but a deliberate choice made out of love. James thought about this for a long time, his young face serious. Then he said, "So I had 2 fathers, one who made me and one who chose me." "That is right," Nathan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I am glad you chose me, Papa," James said, and he climbed into Nathan's lap and hugged him tight. Rebecca turned away so the boys would not see her crying, but Nathan saw, and later that night he held her and told her that they had done right by Thomas's memory, raising his son to be a good and thoughtful person. More years passed. Rebecca had another baby, a daughter this time, whom they named Sarah after Nathan's mother. She had Rebecca's red hair and Nathan's dark eyes, and she was the light of all their lives. 2 years after Sarah came another girl, Margaret, called Maggie from birth, who was small and fierce and determined to keep up with her brothers no matter what they were doing. The house was always full of noise and laughter and sometimes tears. There were good years when the cattle brought fair prices and the weather cooperated, and hard years when drought or disease or market crashes made every day a struggle. But through it all, Rebecca and Nathan faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing season. James grew into a tall, intelligent young man who surprised everyone by deciding to become a teacher rather than a rancher. Nathan supported his choice without question, proud that his son wanted to use his mind and help other children learn. Daniel, as expected, took to ranching like a duck to water, and by the time he was 16, he was working alongside Nathan as a full partner. The girls were still young, but Sarah showed signs of having her father's way with horses, while Maggie was a natural caretaker, always nursing injured animals back to health. On James's 18th birthday, Nathan gave him a gift that brought tears to the young man's eyes. It was a photograph, old and faded, of Thomas Vance. Nathan had tracked it down through old friends of Thomas's, determined that James should know what his birth father looked like. "You are my son in every way that matters," Nathan told James. "But he was your father too, and you should know him. You should remember him." James hugged Nathan fiercely and told him that he was the luckiest son in the world to have a father like him. That night, the whole family gathered on the porch as they often did on summer evenings, and Nathan told stories of that long-ago blizzard, of finding Rebecca in the line cabin, of delivering James, and realizing that his whole life was about to change. The children loved the story, even though they had heard it dozens of times, and Rebecca sat close to Nathan, their hands linked, remembering those desperate, beautiful days when their unlikely family had begun. Years continued to unfold. James went off to normal school in Helena to get his teaching certificate and came back to start a school in Leno, where he met and fell in love with a sweet-natured girl named Emma. Daniel married young to a rancher's daughter named Kate, and they built a house on the far edge of Nathan and Rebecca's property, expanding the family ranch. Sarah, true to form, became a renowned horsebreaker, one of the few women in Montana Territory who could make a living at it. Maggie followed her heart east to become a nurse, though she came home often and always with stories that made them all laugh and cry. Nathan and Rebecca grew old together, their hair turning silver, their bodies wearing the marks of a life spent in hard work and good living. They were blessed with grandchildren, a whole passel of them, and their house was always full during holidays and harvest time. On quiet evenings, they would sit together on the porch they had built 40 years earlier, watching the sunset and remembering. "You ever regret it?" Nathan asked Rebecca one such evening when they were both well into their 60s. Marrying a stranger in such a rush, giving up any chance at something different. Rebecca looked at him, at the man who had saved her life and her son's life all those years ago, who had loved them both without hesitation, who had built a beautiful life with her out of nothing but determination and faith. She thought of all the years of laughter and tears, of children raised and dreams achieved, of love that had only grown deeper with time. "Not for one single moment," she said firmly. "You gave me everything, Nathan Quinn. You gave me a family and a home and a love I never thought I would have. That blizzard was the worst and best thing that ever happened to me, because it brought me to you." Nathan pulled her close and kissed her forehead, and they sat there as the stars came out, just as they had sat together through countless nights over the decades. The wind that had once brought a terrible blizzard now brought only the sweet scent of prairie grass and wildflowers. The cabin where James had been born was still standing on the ridge, maintained by the ranch as a reminder of that dramatic night. Sometimes grandchildren would ask to hear the story, and Nathan and Rebecca would tell it together, each filling in details the other forgot, painting a picture of courage and chance and choosing love. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered at the ranch for a massive celebration. James came from town with Emma and their 4 children. Daniel and Kate brought their 6 kids, plus 2 grandchildren of their own. Sarah rode in from her place up north with her husband and 3 sons. Maggie made the trip from back east with her doctor husband and their 2 daughters. The house overflowed with people, with love, with life. That evening, after the food had been eaten and the children were playing in the yard, Nathan stood up and called for everyone's attention. He held out his hand to Rebecca, and she took it, rising to stand beside him. They stood together, still strong despite their years, and looked out at the family they had built. 50 years ago, Nathan said, his voice still strong despite his age, a terrible blizzard nearly took from me the two most important people I would ever meet. But instead it gave them to me. It gave me Rebecca, who is the strongest and finest woman I have ever known. And it gave me James, who became my son not through blood but through choice, which made the bond even stronger. From those two came all of this. He gestured at the assembled family, at the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. All of this love, all of this life, all because I found a woman in a line cabin who needed help, and she was brave enough to let a stranger become her family. There was not a dry eye in the house. James came forward and embraced both his parents, and then all the children were there, and the grandchildren. A massive group hug that turned into laughter and more tears. Later, after everyone else had gone to bed or to the various cabins and tents set up around the property, Rebecca and Nathan sat alone under the stars. "We did good, didn't we?" Nathan said softly. "With this life we built, we did very good," Rebecca agreed. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Nathan said, "I meant what I said that night in the line cabin, you know, about knowing. I knew from the moment I saw you that you would change my life. I just had no idea how much or how wonderful it would be." "I did not know then," Rebecca admitted. "I was too scared and too sad to know anything except that I needed help. But I know now. I think I knew within weeks, really, that you were the one I was meant to find. That blizzard brought us together, and nothing will ever separate us." "Nothing," Nathan agreed, and he kissed her the way he had kissed her thousands of times over the years, with tenderness and passion and absolute devotion. They lived several more good years together, watching their family continue to grow and prosper. When Nathan died at the age of 81, peacefully in his sleep with Rebecca beside him, the whole territory seemed to mourn. The funeral was packed with people whose lives he had touched, cowboys he had worked with, neighbors he had helped, children he had taught to ride. But it was James who gave the eulogy, standing tall and proud, speaking of the man who had chosen to be his father, who had shown him what it meant to love without condition, to commit without reservation. Rebecca lived 3 more years after Nathan passed, cared for tenderly by her children and grandchildren. She spent her days in the house they had built together, surrounded by pictures and memories, often sitting on the porch and looking out at the land they had carved from wilderness. She spoke often of Nathan, keeping his memory alive, telling the grandchildren and great-grandchildren stories of his kindness, his strength, his unwavering love. When Rebecca died at the age of 84, she was buried beside Nathan on a hill overlooking their ranch, under a sky as wide and blue as the one that had cleared after the blizzard that changed everything. Her children buried her with a small wooden carving Nathan had made for her on their first anniversary, a simple piece that showed a cabin in a snowstorm with 3 figures inside, safe and warm. It had always sat on their mantelpiece, a reminder of where they had begun. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down through Daniel's line, though all the children shared in its prosperity and its legacy. The story of the blizzard and the line cabin and the cowboy who delivered a baby and became a father became part of family lore, told and retold at gatherings, never losing its power to move and inspire. The actual line cabin was eventually enclosed in a small museum on the ranch property, preserved as a testament to the power of courage and chance and choosing love. The family continued to thrive and grow, spreading out across Montana and beyond, but they always came back to the ranch for reunions and holidays. They always told the story of Nathan and Rebecca, of how a terrible blizzard brought them together, of how a cowboy delivered a baby that was not his and asked to be a father, of how a widow grieving her husband found the courage to say yes to an impossible proposal. It became a touchstone for the family, a reminder that love comes in unexpected forms, that family is not just about blood but about choice and commitment, that the hardest moments in life can become the doorways to the greatest joy. James's descendants became teachers and scholars, carrying on his love of learning. Daniel's became ranchers and stewards of the land, carrying on the work Nathan had begun. Sarah's became horse trainers and riders, wild and free like she had been. Maggie's became healers and caregivers, serving communities across the West. But all of them, regardless of their path, carried within them the legacy of that blizzard night, the understanding that when life presents you with someone who needs help, you help them, and if you are very lucky, that help transforms into something beautiful and lasting. The story never got old, never lost its power. Great-great-grandchildren would sit wide-eyed as the oldest family members told it, marveling at the courage of their ancestors, the sheer unlikeliness of it all. How a woman in labor got caught in a blizzard. How a cowboy checking line cabins found her just in time. How he delivered her baby with steady hands and a calm heart. How he looked at that newborn boy and the exhausted mother and knew, just knew, that this was his family, that he would move heaven and earth to protect them and love them. And how Rebecca, in the midst of grief and pain and terror, found the strength to believe in a stranger, to trust him with her life and her son's life, and eventually with her heart. How she learned to love again when she thought she never would, how she built a life beyond anything she had imagined possible. How she proved that it is never too late to start over, to choose happiness, to embrace the unexpected. The ranch itself stood as a monument to their love and their life's work. Over a century after Nathan and Rebecca first broke ground on their little house, the land was still in the family, still productive, still beautiful. The original house had been added onto and modernized, but the core of it remained, those 4 rooms and a loft that Nathan had built with his own hands. Visitors could tour it now, see the preserved furnishings, the pictures on the walls, the small museum that told the story of the Quinn family and their place in Montana history. But the real legacy was not in the buildings or the land, or even the material prosperity that had grown over the generations. The real legacy was in the love that had started it all, the choice to reach out in a moment of crisis and say, "I will help you," and then, "I will love you," and then, "I will build a life with you." That legacy lived in every marriage in the family, every parent's love for their child, every moment when someone chose kindness over convenience, connection over comfort. Nathan and Rebecca Quinn had not known, that night in the line cabin with the blizzard raging outside, that they were beginning something that would last for generations. They were just 2 people trying to survive, to help a baby come into the world safely, to make it through the storm. But from those humble, desperate beginnings came something extraordinary. Came a love story for the ages, a family that would touch thousands of lives, a legacy that would endure long after the snows of that December blizzard had melted and become part of the earth. And that, in the end, was the true magic of it all. Not that they survived, though that was miraculous enough. Not that they fell in love, though that was beautiful and unlikely. But that they chose, every single day for 50 years, to honor the commitment they made to each other in that tiny cabin, to build their life together with intention and care, to weather every storm, literal and metaphorical, side by side, to create something from nothing, to turn a desperate moment into a lifetime of love. The blizzard was terrible, as blizzards are. But it was also a gift, bringing together two souls who needed each other, even if they did not know it yet. Giving James a father who would love him unconditionally. Giving Nathan the family he had always dreamed of. Giving Rebecca a second chance at happiness. And giving all of their descendants a story to hold on to, a reminder that even in the darkest, coldest moments, love can find a way in. That courage and kindness and the willingness to take a chance on each other can create miracles. So the story lived on, told around dinner tables and campfires, written in family histories and local lore. The story of how a baby was born during a terrible blizzard, how a cowboy delivered him with gentle hands and a steady heart, and how that cowboy asked to be a father and built a family and a legacy that would last forever. It was a simple story, really, about simple people doing their best in difficult circumstances. But it was also a profound story about what it means to be human, to love, to commit, to build something beautiful out of the raw materials life provides. And every winter, when the first big storm rolled across the Montana plains, bringing wind and snow and bitter cold, the Quinn family descendants would think of Nathan and Rebecca, of James being born in that line cabin, of the choice that changed everything. They would be grateful for the blizzard, terrible as it was, because it brought their family into being. They would honor the courage of their ancestors, the love that sustained them, the life they built together. And they would know, deep in their bones, that some things are meant to be, that sometimes the universe conspires to bring the right people together at the right moment. And that when it does, the wise choice is to say yes, to reach out, to build bridges instead of walls, to choose love even when it seems impossible. That was the lesson Nathan and Rebecca taught through their lives and their love. And it was a lesson that echoed through the generations, a gift that kept on giving, a story that would never end as long as there were people to tell it and hearts to be moved by it. The blizzard was terrible, but love was stronger. And in the end, that was all that mattered.